everyone! This weekend we're going to talk about the introductory paragraph, and the reason we're talking about this is because first quarter we've spent a lot of time kind of talking about small chunks of writing. We did summary analysis template and we did précis. Now we're going to move into actually second quarter talking about the full structure of an entire essay. And so obviously, good place to start is the introduction, and so that's what we're going to talk about this weekend. Do remember to have out your worksheet that goes with this video because you're going to fill that out as we go, and I'm going to check that on Monday. Alright, so the introductory paragraph is going to have several different parts, and so I want you guys to kind of be listening and noting these as we go. We'll talk about these more in detail in just a minute, but I'm going to go through just the three main parts right now so you kind of have an idea of what we're going for. And some of these terms probably sound familiar to you. So the first part of the introduction is what we call the attention getter. This is the very first sentence or a couple of sentences of your introduction. And it's important to have an attention getter because we don't want to start off our essay just jumping right into the topic. You want to have some way to kind of engage your reader and to get them easing in and interested in that topic before you just start talking about it. The second part of our introduction is going to be what's called transition sentences. These serve a couple of purposes. So first of all, they're going to be kind of that stepping stone between the attention getter and what we call the thesis statement, which is going to be the last part of the introduction. Also, though, transition sentences are a really good way to provide some background information. So particularly if you are writing about a work of literature, which we will do this year, transition sentences can be a really good way to kind of give some of that background info. Author, genre, maybe kind of a brief summary of what, is going on in the work. And with your transition sentences, you want at least 3 sentences for this process. And I know that seems kind of strict, but I promise that in order to really transition effectively, you need multiple sentences there. Okay, the last part of our introduction is going to be what's called the thesis statement. And this is by far the most important sentence in your entire essay because it's going to be your main idea. Like I said, we're going to go into more detail about what each of these are next, but I'd like for you to go ahead and answer question number 1 on your worksheet. So if you need to take a second and pause, again, the question asks you what the 3 parts are, so go ahead and answer that at this point. When you're done answering question number 1, you can also answer question number 2 on your worksheet, which asks you what the minimum number of sentences in an introduction can be. So if you think the attention getter has to be at least 1 sentence, the transitions have to be at least 3, and the thesis has to be at least 1. So, or it should be 1. So minimum, obviously, probably most times you're going to have more than this, but minimum number of sentences should be 5. So let's go ahead and take a second to pause and answer question number 2 on your handout. Alright everyone, so we're going to talk a little bit about the attention getter in detail in this next section. So again, the attention getter, the main point is to grab that attention of the reader. You want them to be interested in your essay, you want them to keep reading. Let's talk about what some examples of effective attention getters would be. Alright, so I'm going to give you 4 options for effective attention getters. You can probably use other types of attention getters, but starting out the year, I think these 4 are kind of a good foundation for you to choose from. So the first effective attention getter is a quotation. So, for example, you would say something like, quote, "Drinking kills more young drivers than any other cause," says John Smith, head of Wisconsin's highway safety. So I want you to think kind of why a quotation would be especially interesting for an attention getter. And I would say that that's probably just because you're able to interest the reader in, oh my gosh, someone said this thing that hopefully you've selected an important quote, and so you can kind of engage the reader that way. The second type of effective attention getter is a statistic. So, for example, 50% of United States marriages end in divorce, one of the highest percentages in the modernized world. Again, let's think about why that statistic would be especially interesting. And I think it's just similar to the quotation. It's because if you use a statistic that is interesting, related to your topic, you're kind of providing that factual evidence that interests people up front. The next type of effective attention getter is going to be an anecdote or a story. So, for example, from the time the downtown number 4 subway train began its 21-mile run below New York City Tuesday, August 27th, something was wrong. And so an anecdote or a story can be especially engaging because obviously if you're telling a story that's compelling, people are going to want to read more. They're going to want to know how that story relates to your topic. And then the final type of effective attention getter is a definition. So, for example, Merriam-Webster's dictionary defines success as, quote, getting or achieving wealth, respect, or fame. And so, again, a definition would be compelling because you're introducing the topic in a way that kind of gives the reader that foundational definition. So I want you guys to kind of notice, like, the 4 types of effective attention getters are the 4 types of evidence we talked about earlier in the semester. So next we're going to talk about ineffective attention getters. And I think that some of you have probably used these in essays before, and that's okay, but you just need to know that from the sophomore level on, we're really looking for something more advanced. So one type of ineffective attention getter is a question, like, should tanning beds be banned for teens in order to help potentially save lives? The reason this isn't really effective is just because it sounds like you don't really know what the answer to that topic is. It just sounds kind of juvenile. So we want to think in formal writing rather than asking questions, we want to make statements. The second type of ineffective attention getter is just a statement of the topic. So, for example, tanning beds should be banned. That's almost something that you're going to want to say later in your thesis statement. That's your main opinion. So you don't ever want to start out the essay with just a general statement. You need to interest the reader first. And then kind of the final type of ineffective attention getter is going to be a preview of what's in the essay. So this essay will revolve around the subject of the Civil War. That's really not interesting. Like, is it helpful? Maybe, but that's not very engaging to me as a reader. Oh, and then I almost forgot, we do have one more type of ineffective attention getter, and this is actually an attention getter that I received in an essay one time. I cannot make this up. But you want to make sure that your attention getter is actually related to the topic. For example, women blink twice as often as men. Charles Dickens was a famous British author. So this student, I think, was interpreting a attention getter as surprising fact rather than related to the topic. And so obviously that's very awkward. We want to avoid that. At this point, you can answer question number 3 on your worksheet. So go ahead and talk about attention getters. What are the effective and ineffective types of attention getters? So go ahead and pause your video. Next, we're going to move into talking about transition sentences. And again, you need 3 minimum. These are transitioning. They're that stepping stone from the attention getter, which we just talked about, to the thesis, which we'll talk about next. And again, the transitions can provide a lot of background on the topic that's really important to have. So again, you don't want to just throw your reader into reading an essay about something that they don't have the foundation for. This is the opportunity where you can give some of that background. So we're actually going to look at a sample of what happens when you just write an introduction with only the attention getter and the thesis and no transitions. So let's read the sample together. The attention getter's in red, and then the thesis is in yellow. On Halloween in the United States, it is tradition for children to dress up in costume and parade around their neighborhood showing off their outfit for candy. Student uniforms should not be mandatory as it suppresses originality, alienates students, and costs money up front. So I'm hoping at this point you're reading this going, what on earth? How does Halloween connect to student uniforms? And that's where those transition sentences come in. So let's go ahead and take a look. On Halloween in the United States, it is tradition for children to dress up in costume and parade around their neighborhood, showing off their outfit for candy. Most children love this practice and take great pride in the costume that they have selected to wear. Though children enjoy wearing costumes on Halloween, the same cannot be said for students who are required to wear a uniform for school. Adolescents and teenagers alike dislike the idea of wearing school uniforms despite the educational and social benefits of such uniformity. Student uniforms should not be mandatory as it suppresses originality, alienates students, and costs money up front. So you can see that I've color-coded those transition sentences to reflect the fact that they connect Halloween with the student uniforms. And so I hope you see the point of those transition sentences there. Alright, at this point you should be able to answer number 4, your question about transition sentences on your worksheet. So take a minute to pause and do that. Alright, so the last section we're going to talk about in the introduction is the thesis. Again, this is the main point of your essay. The term that you can kind of connect to our first quarter discussion is that this would be like your main claim as a writer. And keep in mind that this is the most important sentence in your entire essay. It's your main claim, your main point. You have to hit the thesis out of the park for an essay to be strong. So let's talk about what a thesis should and shouldn't be. A thesis should be arguable. So, for example, the tragedy that Shakespeare presents in Romeo and Juliet is a caution of rash love and uncontrollable passion. So again, just like a claim, that could be arguable because you could claim that Romeo and Juliet maybe isn't a caution of that. Next, a thesis should be a statement with subpoints that preview the other parts of the essay to come. So, for example, ONW is the best high school in Kansas due to its strong academics, athletics, and activities. So I know in the essay now you're going to be talking about academics, athletics, and activities. So it's that kind of nice little organizational, you're giving me the preview of what's to come. Next, a thesis should be placed at the end of the introductory paragraph in the essay. Again, it's that last part. So I'm not going to read this example to you, but I want you to just kind of see this example introduction and note that we see the thesis statement in pink at the end of the introduction. Alright, now we're going to talk about what a thesis shouldn't be. And again, it's okay if you've made some of these mistakes in the past, but at the sophomore level, we're kind of hoping that you're going to get out of that habit. So a thesis should not be a fact. Okay, a fact is not a claim. It has to be arguable. Obviously, a fact isn't going to do that. So for example, Cortez conquered Mexico in 1509. Like, we can't really debate that. That's not a thesis. Instead, you could say something like, the colonial mentality which prompted Cortez's barbaric invasion of Mexico brought about not an advance of native society, but a destruction of Aztec culture. So, that's arguable. Someone could argue that Cortez wasn't barbaric. Maybe he was beneficial. Okay, a thesis should not be a question. And again, we kind of talked about this, but you don't ever want to ask something like, how can we solve the lack of parking at whatever school? Then it just kind of sounds like you don't even know the answer to that yourself. Instead, you want to make a statement. So the lack of parking at whatever school can be solved by X, Y, and Z. So again, in formal writing, we want to start avoiding those questions and making statements. Alright, a thesis should... Oh, I already have a question. What am I doing? Let's skip to our next slide here. So a thesis should not be, finally, an fragment or incomplete sentence or title. So I kind of see this a lot, surprisingly. Students will say something like, that we should become more aware of our environment. Well, that's not a complete sentence. Or, awareness of the environment. That's more of a title, not a statement. Instead, you need to say something like, people should become more aware of the environment to enable the protection of the wilderness, wildlife, and rapidly disappearing resources. Alright, so lastly, a thesis should not be an announcement, like, in this paper I will discuss why cheerleading is a sport. That's just kind of juvenile. I know that you're talking about this paper. Instead, just come out and make your statement. All right, at this time you can answer question number 5. Thanks, guys.